Alfred the Great, who died in 899, was the first to call himself king of the Anglo-Saxons. A brilliant leader and a true warrior, Alfred was famous for his battles against the Vikings. His life was defined by chronic ill health, with historians speculating he suffered from a variety of painful illnesses, including Crohn's disease. He died in his late 40s, likely from complications of his poor health after a long and exhausting life on the battlefield. Alfred's son, Edward the Elder, who died in 924, was a powerful military leader who conquered vast territories from the Vikings and established a unified kingdom. He died suddenly in battle while putting down a rebellion, a common and honorable end for a warrior king of his time. Ælfweard, the son of Edward the Elder, also died in 924. He was likely a sickly child, as he passed away just 16 days after his father. It's almost certain he never reigned, but he's on the official list. Given the medical knowledge of the era, he likely succumbed to a sudden fever or a pre-existing health condition. Æthelstan, who died in 939, was the grandson of Alfred the Great and is considered by many to be the first true king of England. He died peacefully in his sleep after a 14-year reign. The exact cause is unknown, but a peaceful death was a luxury few monarchs of his time enjoyed. Æthelstan's half-brother, Edmund I, who died in 946, had one of the most absurd deaths in royal history. While at a banquet, he saw a thief he had previously exiled in the crowd. In a fit of rage, Edmund tried to physically remove the man himself. A struggle ensued, and the thief stabbed the king to death. Eadred, who died in 955, was Edmund I's younger brother. His death was likely caused by poor health. He suffered from an illness that left him unable to eat, and he eventually died in his early 30s. Eadwig, who died in 959, was a teenager when he became king. He had a tumultuous reign marked by a rivalry with the church and other nobles. He died mysteriously at the age of 19. Historians speculate he was murdered, likely a victim of the political infighting that plagued his reign. Edgar the Peaceful, who died in 975, was Eadwig's younger brother. A strong and stable king, he brought peace and stability to England. He died at the young age of 32 from a sudden illness, possibly a fever or a plague, after a long reign filled with debauchery. Edward the Martyr, who died in 978, was Edgar's son. He was brutally murdered in his late teens, likely by the agents of his stepmother who wanted her own son to be king. His death was a tragic and shocking event that sent shockwaves through the country and solidified his status as a martyr. Æthelred the Unready, who died in 1016, was the stepbrother of Edward the Martyr. His long reign was marked by constant Viking invasions and his inability to deal with them effectively. He was forced into exile by the invading Viking king, Sweyn. He died a year after his return, a weary and defeated man. Sweyn Forkbeard, who died in 1014, was the Viking king who conquered England and forced Æthelred the Unready into exile. He died just 5 weeks after being declared king, likely from a sudden illness or a stroke, making his reign one of the shortest in English history. Edmund Ironside, who died in 1016, was the son of Æthelred. A brilliant military leader, he fought a heroic campaign against the Vikings. He died just 7 months into his reign, and many historians believe he was assassinated by the new Viking king, Cnut the Great. Cnut the Great, who died in 1035, was a legendary Viking warrior king who ruled over a vast empire that included England, Denmark, and Norway. He died in his late 30s, likely from natural causes after a long and prosperous reign. Harefoot, who died in 1040, was the son of Cnut. He died at a young age, likely from an illness, and his body was dug up by his younger brother Harthacnut, who threw it into a swamp. Harthacnut, who died in 1042, was the son of Cnut and the half-brother of Harefoot. He died suddenly at a wedding after drinking too much alcohol. He was only 24 years old. Edward the Confessor, who died in 1066, was a pious and beloved king. His death without an heir plunged England into a succession crisis that led to the most famous battle in English history. He died peacefully after a long illness. Harold II, who died in 1066, was the final Anglo-Saxon king of England. He was killed at the Battle of Hastings, fighting against the invading Norman forces of William the Conqueror. His death is famously depicted in the Bayeux Tapestry, where he is hit by an arrow in the eye, although the cause is disputed. William I, who died in 1087, is better known as William the Conqueror, the man who stole Harold's throne. He passed away from a wound while horse riding, but for comedic value, when he was taken to Rouen Cathedral for his funeral, his body exploded. Seriously, William II, who died in 1100, was William the Conqueror's son. He was mysteriously killed while hunting with his entourage when an arrow pierced his lung. Was it an accident, or was it an assassination? The world may never know. Henry I, who died in 1135, was William II's brother. Known for his many illegitimate children, he died a rather pathetic death, reportedly after eating too much fish. Stephen, who died in 1154, was Henry I's nephew. He had a long reign filled with civil war against his cousin Matilda. When his own son died, he made a deal with Matilda which allowed her son to succeed him. He died in 1154 from stomach problems, possibly stomach cancer. Henry II, who died in 1189, was Matilda's son. He is often overlooked by historians. He married the fabulously wealthy and intelligent Eleanor of Aquitaine, who gave birth to 8 children. Before Henry died, his sons were at war with one another. Henry II died from shock after learning about his youngest son's desertion. Richard I, who died in 1199, is better known as Richard the Lionheart. Famous for his crusading activity in the Middle East, he was killed by a crossbow bolt during the siege of a castle. His death sent his mother, Eleanor of Aquitaine, into a crying fit. John, who died in 1216, is met with scorn by historians and his courtiers at the time. In his incompetence at ruling, he was forced to sign the Magna Carta in 1215, which gave the barons more rights. He died at the age of 49 from dysentery. Henry III, who died in 1272, was an absolute badass, though many under his reign fought otherwise. After countless rebellions and petty squabbles, he died after yet another rumor of rebellion reached him. Edward I, who died in 1307, was an ambitious king who reformed land and inheritance rights. He also gained the nickname Longshanks and was a ruthless warrior who tried to conquer Scotland. He died, just like John, from a bout of dysentery. Edward II, who died in 1327, had one of the most bizarre royal deaths of all time. He was a notorious homosexual king who annoyed many barons with his relationships with men. His wife, Isabella of France, a cunning woman known as the She-Wolf, had her own lover and wanted Edward away from the throne. What better way to depose your husband than to shove a red-hot poker up his ass? Seriously, this must have hurt, and it did kill him. Edward III, who died in 1377, was Isabella and Edward II's son. He enjoyed a remarkably long reign of over 50 years. He was renowned for his ability as a state administrator, but also for sparking the 100 Years' War. Unlike his father, Edward had a relatively peaceful death, succumbing to a stroke at the age of 64. Richard II, who died in 1400, did not have a successful reign. After annoying his uncle and disinheriting his son, Richard II soon found himself the victim of a kinslaying assault. Henry IV, who died in 1413, had his cousin Richard murdered in a bid to take the throne. Because of the bloody way he secured power, Henry IV's claim to authority was not absolute, and he faced many rebellions. By 1413, it was clear that the king was dying from a terrible illness. He passed away from a skin disorder in which his body reportedly melted away. Henry V, who died in 1422, was a historical hunk of a man who won the Battle of Agincourt and seriously intensified the 100 Years' War in England's favor. He was not killed in battle, but died at the young age of 35 from a terrible disease, possibly dysentery. Henry VI, who died in 1471, did not like to rule and most likely suffered from a mental disorder. His incapacity motivated another member of the royal family, Edward of York, to rise up and claim the throne. During Edward of York's tumultuous reign, he had Henry VI murdered. Historians are pretty sure that he was smothered by a pillow. Edward IV, who died in 1483, is better known as Edward of York. Another historical hunk of a man, his handsome physique did not last long. After years of infighting with his own family, the drama took a toll on the king's well-being. He passed away in 1483 from, well, we're pretty sure, poison. Edward V, who died in 1483, and his brother were imprisoned in the Tower of London by their uncle, Richard III. No one knows for sure what happened to them, but it is widely believed that they were murdered in their sleep by their uncle's men. Richard III, who died in 1485, was a brilliant warrior killed at the Battle of Bosworth Field, the last major battle of the War of the Roses. He was a ruthless ruler who was widely hated by the people. His death marked the end of the Plantagenet dynasty and the beginning of the Tudor dynasty. Henry VII, who died in 1509, founded the most famous dynasty in English royal history, the Tudors. He was forced to marry his distant cousin Elizabeth of York to safeguard his claim to England, but the two fell in love. He managed to die at an old age, although from tuberculosis. Henry VIII, who died in 1547, the most infamous of all English kings, was an absolute man-baby. He literally murdered 2 of his wives because he didn't fancy them anymore. The reason why the monarch is now the head of the Church of England is purely because Henry VIII wanted to have sex with Anne Boleyn. Throughout his life, he loved jousting, which led to a nasty ulcer on his leg. By the time he died, his life was so messy that he probably died from multiple things: obesity, scurvy, syphilis, and to top it all off, he also exploded. Edward VI, who died in 1553, was the long-awaited son and heir for Henry VIII, but he passed away at the age of 15 from a fever, ending the male line of the Tudor dynasty. Lady Jane Grey, who died in 1554, was a very much overlooked monarch. She actually reigned for just 9 days. When Edward was dying, his counselors managed to fabricate evidence to say that he wanted this random girl to succeed him, purely because she was Protestant and not Catholic. However, this decision made the next queen, Mary I, very, very angry, so in 1554, Mary had poor Jane executed. Mary I, who died in 1558, was affectionately known as Bloody Mary. She wanted only one thing in her life: to become a mother. She married her cousin, Philip of Spain, in a desperate attempt to conceive a child. Unfortunately, when Mary thought she was pregnant, her physicians informed her that she had cancer. This may have been the cause of her death at just age 42. Elizabeth I, who died in 1603, is apparently the greatest monarch in English history. She managed to reach the age of 70, but by then she had lost many of her friends and her lover. She stumbled into a deep depression and died peacefully after a long reign. James I, who died in 1625, was a bit of a letdown. He was a Scottish king who inherited the throne after Elizabeth died without an heir. He also had a relatively letdown of a death in 1625 from dysentery. Charles I, who died in 1649, sparked a terrible period in English historiography known as the Civil War. By 1649, Charles had lost most of his control and was taken by Republicans to his public execution. Charles II, who died in 1685, was the party king. All his partying soon caught up with him, and he passed away from his doctor's intervention, known as bloodletting. James II, who died in 1701, did not die in England because his own daughter had him removed from the throne. James died in France close to Versailles, and his cause of death was a brain tumor. Mary II, who died in 1694, was the daughter of James II and also the one who had him removed from the throne with her husband, William of the Netherlands. She died at the age of 32 from smallpox. William III, who died in 1702, was king only because of his marriage to Mary. When he died from a broken collarbone after falling from his horse, the personal union between England and the Netherlands dissolved. Queen Anne, who died in 1714, had an extremely challenging life. She was pregnant 17 times and only had 5 live births. Her death is disputed, although by the time she died, she was wider than she was tall. She passed away before the age of 50. George I, who died in 1727, was the first Georgian king of England. Many in Britain criticized George for being too German. He managed to live until his late 60s, but passed away from a stroke. George II, who died in 1760, was the son of a previous George, and reportedly had a terrible relationship with his father. George II's death is bizarre, to say the least. In 1760, he woke up and went to the toilet, only for his valet to hear a loud crash moments later. George fell into the toilet and broke it. After they lifted him back into bed, the king was dead because of internal injury. George III, who died in 1820, is the most well-known of any George on this list. He was a grandson of George II. George III's illness, which many attribute to porphyria, caused him to be bedridden and often incoherent. He passed away at the age of 81. George IV, who died in 1830, similar to Queen Anne, died from a period of binge eating. His death in 1830 was popularly criticized because the king had an immense reputation for hedonism. William IV, who died in 1837, is virtually forgotten. He died from an inconclusive illness. Many believe it to be related to depression. He passed away just a month after Victoria turned 18. Queen Victoria, who died in 1901, does not need much of an introduction. She surpassed her grandfather to become the longest reigning monarch of England before Queen Elizabeth II came along. Victoria passed away at the age of 82, spending half of her life as a widow. Edward VII, who died in 1910, should have died 8 years before he actually did. Before his own coronation, he was struck down with appendicitis. He was expected to die but survived the surgery and lived for 8 more years. He finally died in 1910 from an acute case of bronchitis, likely caused by him smoking 30 cigarettes in a single day. George V, who died in 1936, absolutely detested and admonished his father's hedonistic lifestyle and swore not to repeat anything that he did. Unfortunately, he did because he also passed away from bronchitis. Edward VIII, who died in 1972, is one of the only monarchs on this list to die while not being the monarch. This is because he abdicated 11 months into his reign after Parliament refused to allow Wallis Simpson, the American divorcee, to be his queen. He died in 1972, days after Elizabeth II came to visit him in Paris from throat cancer. George VI, who died in 1952, also known as the Queen's dad, resented his position as king. He had a reputation for being humble and modest, qualities that his eldest daughter inherited. However, many, including the Queen, blamed George VI's death on the stresses of his role as king. Days after saying goodbye to his daughter, the king had a heart attack and passed away. Elizabeth II, who died in 2022, recently passed away at the time of this writing. She had an iconic reign that spanned over 70 years, a feat no other monarch had ever achieved. Her life was defined by duty, stability, and her unwavering presence on the world stage. She died peacefully at Balmoral Castle in Scotland at the age of 96. Charles III, the current king, took the throne after his mother's death. His reign has just begun. That is the full history of how every English monarch died. This is Long History Short, your shortcut to the whole story. We want to continue to bring stories that are worth the listen and help not only educate, but entertain a bit too. If you have any suggestions for stories you'd like to hear, we would love to know. Leave a comment, and if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe.